Well, friends and family will gather today to farewell Queensland woman Hannah Clarke and her 3 young children. The 4 were killed last month when Ms Clarke's estranged husband and the children's father set them on fire in Brisbane. Yesterday, the federal government announced a no-interest loan program to help women experiencing domestic violence, but women's safety advocates have criticised the move, saying ministers have committed to nothing that would improve women's safety since their meeting on Friday. Joining me now is Women's Safety New South Wales Chief Executive Officer Hayley Foster. Hayley, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So can you just elaborate on that then, if you wouldn't mind, the issues that you're having with government responses so far?
Look, thank you. Frankly, we're outraged. You know, at the moment, women and children are being threatened, dominated and violated behind closed doors, and it seems like the federal government is out to lunch. Really, you know, the federal minister and all the state and territory ministers came together last Friday in the wake of this terrible tragedy to look at how the system failed this family and what can they do to turn this around so it wouldn't happen again. And the only thing that they've come forward with is a no-interest loan scheme. Quite frankly, if we're fair dinkum about stopping these horrible murders, a $2,000 loan is not going to solve it.
But it's such a large problem. There's no quick fix to this, is there?
No, there isn't. But we've got to start by treating it seriously and putting some serious and sustained investment behind the problem. But
the investment is there. I mean, the state governments and the federal governments in total have committed hundreds of millions of dollars. New South Wales government, I believe, is about 400 million. Victorian government's about 400 million, and that's about the same for the federal government as well. So there's a large amount of money there. So where do you think that should be channeled? What would you do with that money?
We would challenge the notion that the investment's there, actually. When you look at the scale of the problem, it is the single biggest driver of death, disability and illness in women between the ages of 15 and 44 years of age. And the federal government is throwing only around $100 million across the nation at this problem. That's, you know, if you break that across the up across the jurisdictions, that's around $10 million per jurisdiction for one of the biggest problems facing Australian women and children. So we would challenge the very notion that we're throwing enough resources at this problem.
So what would you do then? Yeah? I mean, it's like you're never really, as awful as it is to say, you're never going to be able to stop it from happening, because, like you mentioned, it does tend to happen behind closed doors. So what would you do to try and stop that? More education programs?
No, I mean, I think that, you know, they came out of the meeting on Friday saying, you know, the federal government wanted the state and territory governments to throw more money into another advertising campaign. Now, what we know is that women and children are being turned away from the services that they seek and that they rely upon for their safety. AVOs are not being systematically enforced, and yet they want another advertising campaign to say, yes, it's safe for you to go out and seek help, and the services aren't there to support them. So it's, quite frankly, it's irresponsible to you know, suggest that people can go out and get help when the services aren't funded there to support them.
And they must...
So what we're...
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, because as soon as a woman tends to report domestic violence, that is a time when she might well be in the most danger.
Correct. And so it makes it all the more irresponsible to suggest to people that you will be safe if you come forward, and then not ensure that the civil protection system that's there to support them and the social services system that's there to support them isn't actually funded to do that, which is exactly what happened in the horrific murder with Hannah Clarke and her children. So what we were hoping to see, and we saw noises of this from some of the ministers going into that meeting, was measures to ensure that AVOs, apprehended violence orders and civil protection orders across the country, would actually be enforced, and that women and children could rely upon them across the country, rather than having generalist magistrates give endless, you know, excuses and endless chances to people who breach those orders. We were hoping for adequate funding so that women and children weren't left having to navigate the service system and give up. And we were hoping for reforms to the family law system so that women weren't told that, essentially you're going to have to hand over your children to a father that your children are absolutely terrified of. These were the sorts of changes that would really change the system and would really keep women and children safe. And quite frankly, the government has let women and children down again.
Okay, Hayley Foster, we're out of time, but really appreciate you coming on the show this morning and sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Pete.